Hello and welcome to another edition of the RJR News Forum. I'm Earl Moxham. With me today from the newsroom are two of my colleagues, Shanik Dawkins, immediately across from me, and Herman Green beside him. We are pleased to welcome our solo guest for today's edition of the show, and he is Major Clive Davis. He is the Director General of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, commonly known as ODPEM. We're going to be doing quite a bit in terms of looking at our areas of disaster risk and how we are coping with those. Significantly, of course, the hurricane season, we are going to be looking at how we have done thus far, the region and Jamaica, and what might be some of the expectations for the rest of the season. I'm going to start, though, by asking Major Davis to, first of all, explain to us the broad range of subject matters under your portfolio, because it's not just about the hurricane season, though that is when we tend to call on you most. So take us through all the areas of disaster risk management and response that you are responsible for. And then immediately thereafter, yes, we do go to the hurricane season, and you tell us how we have been doing thus far and what are your expectations thereafter.
Okay, thank you so very much. And I'm happy that you made that point that we're not just about hurricanes. The office has the mandate under law for all issues relating to disaster risk management and, by extension, disaster risk reduction. And so we go on a cycle that starts with mitigation, which says, look, what it is that we can do to prevent a hazard, reduce the chances of a hazard occurring, or reduce the impact of that hazard on persons. We then go into preparedness, which is what are the things that we need to do long before the event overcomes us, or long before the event occurs. From there, we go into the response mode, which is the steps taken when the event is unfolding. And last but by no means least, recovery, which is where we go back to try to put things back to as best as is possible to that state of normalcy. The ODPEM, however, has embraced the all hazards agenda. And so whether they be natural or they be man-induced, we are responsible. And whereas we might not be the ones on the front line physically managing these emergencies, the ODPEM is the national coordinating body. And so once an emergency unfolds or is about to unfold, we establish what is known as the National Emergency Operations Center. And that center has usually in it all the heads of the particular agencies required to respond or deal with that particular hazard. And we sit there from the start until it's all over.
All right, so we're going to come to some of those hazards in a short while, those that perhaps we don't think about every day. But let's look at how things have been playing out thus far for this hurricane season, the Atlantic hurricane season. And of course, now we have to speak more and more about the Gulf of Mexico. And what are your expectations beyond where we are today?
Okay, let me start by saying that this season started early. The first system we had was on the 25th of May. So we had a pre-season event. But up to this point in time, we have now a total of 14 storms that have formed. 7 of them became hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes, that mean above category 3.
What were the projections prior to the start?
The projections prior to the start, I think we were down at about 12 storms, right? We have exceeded that. But what is interesting, and I want Jamaicans to understand, is that despite the fact that Jamaica has not been impacted by any of these directly, it has been an exceptionally active season. You recognize that one of these tropical storms just went into Portugal, Spain, France. However, at this time of year in the Caribbean, we normally breathe a little sigh of relief, because at this time of the year, under normal conditions, the Gulf of Mexico is usually the area where most storms are born, let me put it that way, at this time of the year. It has to do with the temperature, the sea temperature at this time of the year. And so it is anticipated that the storms going forward could end up being formed in the Gulf of Mexico. However, let me just hasten to add, this is how it has been. Much has changed since that. Much has changed. And so it would not be unusual for us to have a storm coming again off the coast of Africa. And usually this is when we are impacted. And so it is not time to relax. It is not time to drop our guard. We have to continue the preparations.
Well, obviously you are in touch with the best scientific knowledge available to you. What are the experts saying to you about their own expectations? Are they giving you any sort of assurance that they think that as far as, you mentioned the patterns, and you mentioned what is not likely to come off the coast of Africa, but it could still happen. Are they saying, well, it is less likely now, or they are still not sure?
It is less likely now for us to get a system coming from out of the Atlantic or from certainly off the coast of Africa at this point in time. But then you see, as I know it's a topic, climate change, it's real, although some persons may say it's not. It's very real. And so when you have systems, tracking on the east coast of the US and going into Newfoundland and Labrador, you know that things have changed. When you have a system crossing the Atlantic and going into the UK, you know that things have changed. And so the norm is not anymore the norm.
And also the extent, the strength of Michael, which formed in the Gulf of Mexico, the ferocity with which it hit Florida. How surprised were you at that?
I saw it coming. And if we had been monitoring the National Hurricane Center and some of the other online systems. And because of how quickly that system became a hurricane, and because of the amount of water that it had to travel over before impacting land, it was clear that it was going to pick up quite a lot of moisture. And if you ever got a chance to look at some of the satellite imagery, one of the things that you would see is it picking up moisture from as far away as Colombia, Venezuela, pulling everything in the Caribbean basin into it and then pushing all of that onto land. So we anticipated it. One of the good things about it is that, again, I'm happy that the political directorate and the disaster managers in Florida saw that coming too and issued appropriate orders well ahead of time. Did the people heed? That's another matter. Did everybody heed? That's another matter.
Herman.
All right. You can basically say the season is not finished as yet, but we've passed the peak, and Jamaica seems to have missed the bullet again. But how
I'm not sure he's going to agree about the missing the bullet up to this point, but anyway.
All right. But how much more prepared are we really on the ground for a storm? I mean, we didn't get any last year. We haven't seen any this year as yet. But when we have rainfall, we see the issues there, almost like a warning sign. From where you sit, are we prepared, and what needs to be done to get us really prepared?
All right. Let me just point out firstly, Jamaica has been rated by a report coming out of the World Bank, the Hotspots Report, indicating that we're the country third most exposed to multiple hazards in the world. 87.7% of the population is at risk. Can you hold for me?
Sure. That's frightening, just thinking about.
Jamaica is the country third most exposed to multiple hazards in the world. The World Bank report indicates that 87.7% of the population is at risk to 3 or more hazards. It means that we cannot take any chances. Let me give you another little bit here. The rains, the simple rains that we had in March to June of 2017 robbed us of 0.2% of GDP. It means that agencies such as the ODPEM have to be at the best, at their game, every time. And so one of the things that we've ensured is that as we go through the hurricane season, despite us not having any systems, we use every opportunity, as it were, to rehearse. Let me put it that way. And so We equip the National Emergency Operations Center staff. We rehearse them in different aspects, looking at different scenarios. We create scenario and put them through it. And by the center staff, we're talking about all the government agencies who participate in that center. We continue to stock up on resources, equipment, shelter material, comfort items, and so on, to ensure that if we were to have an impact, we'd be ready for it. The local authorities play a critical role. In fact, they are responsible for disaster management in their jurisdiction. And so what we do is we provide a lot of technical support to them to ensure that the local authorities can manage. And we would want to get to the stage one day where they can manage without us, totally, because that ought to be the end game. Now, in addition to that, there is also a contingency, can I call it, a whole new range of financial instruments that's been rolled out with the Ministry of Finance to take care of disasters. It includes contingent credit facility and other tools that will be there in the event that we have an emergency situation. Our partners have been unbelievably supportive. And those partners are not only local, as in the NWA, the Ministry of Health, the Jamaica Red Cross, a number of faith-based organizations that we meet with on a regular basis, even now that nothing is happening. But we also have a number of international partners. Through the UN system, for example, we have formed a grouping called the Humanitarian Country Team. It comprises all the UN bodies in Jamaica under its local coordinator, plus a number of friendly governments that are into the business of development, response, supporting disasters, and so on. The USAID, after Global Affairs Canada, the EU, and so on. And what we keep on doing is to engage them throughout the period so that if we were to have an impact, we're not trying to find who to talk to in the dark. And they're all a part of the system. The people from the PAHO, for example, they are plugged into our Ministry of Health. They know, PAHO knows what the Ministry of Health capabilities are. They know, the Ministry of Health know what they can get if they need support from a PAHO or a WHO. And that is how we operate. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security is primarily responsible for providing the relief supplies to persons impacted by any kind of adverse event. And they too are a part of this Humanitarian Country Team, and they are plugged into international organizations sitting around the table with us ever so often to look at what is happening. One of the things I must take pride in also about the agency that I have the privilege to lead is that we do not have to learn from a Jamaican experience. We watched Florida. We watched every minute of what was going on in Florida because we must learn, and if we don't have to wait for it to happen to us. And that is what we take pride in. We watch what is happening around us. We learn from that. We sit, we have these open forums so that we can learn and do better.
What in particular about that Florida experience that perhaps would have given you perhaps new insights and new thought in terms of what else do we need to do now to make sure that if a Michael were to hit us, we are better prepared than we are today?
I think two things come home to me right away. One is to adhere to evacuation orders. Get out. When you're told to get out of there.
But we have not been good at this.
No.
How are you going to be more effective in that now?
You see, that is the beauty of it. We are trying, and we have always tried, to use moral suasion to get persons to move. However, the Disaster Risk Management Act of 2015 empowers the Prime Minister, on advice from the office, that's in the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, to declare any area, right, as a disaster area. And it does not mean that the disaster would have had to have taken place. It can be a preemptive decision made based on information provided to the Honorable Prime Minister. And once he declares that, it gives the ODPEM and other supporting agencies who are called authorized persons a sweeping amount of rights to go in and physically remove people if we have to.
So when you
We can do that.
When you do that now, what plans will be put in place of these persons?
Okay, and so what we would be doing is moving them, first of all. We hope that some of them will take the initiative and move to places where they have relatives, friends, wherever. But if that is not in place for them, we will provide the shelters for them. We have equipment. We have shelters available to us.
Those are designated shelters,
Designated
or
shelters.
schools being used as shelters?
Yeah, well, our designated shelters, most of them happens to be schools or public buildings.
But isn't it time for us to have a designated shelter, whereas we don't use schools? Because the problems you have sometimes, those who are hardest hit by a disaster won't be able to return in time, and then the school normally has to return.
And not fit for purpose, many of them.
Well, it's one of the realities that we have. And in fact, I know Minister Mackenzie, who is the portfolio minister responsible for the disaster office, has a concept, and he would like for us to move in that direction, to have facilities built exclusively, especially in some of the more vulnerable areas, built purpose-built just as shelters.
Any timeline when we can expect that?
No, we have been having discussions with a number of partners. We've been having discussions with the Mexicans, for example, to learn from their experience. But the reality of our situation right now is that I do not see it as something that we can afford to do right now. Instead, what we have been doing, there is a program called the Safe Schools Program that we have been working with another development partner to reinforce schools, to make schools safer, not just for your day-to-day classroom activity, but also in the event of hurricanes or earthquakes. And those are some of the things that we're looking at. Every year, however, the local authorities go through and they check every one of their shelters. In fact, across Jamaica right now, we have some 900 shelters. The minister at last year instructed that we go through and evaluate, re-evaluate all of those shelters and decide on, is this the number that we need to keep? Are they still at the level that they need to be at? Is there any improvement that we need to put on them in order to make them safe? But I do not know that at this time we can afford to have a facility that we would build and just, leave it there as a shelter. Our people in the US of A is not doing it. But you mentioned evacuation, and I said that was one of my concerns. The other thing that I picked up very, very quickly was method of construction or building material, let me put it that way. We've always been criticized in Jamaica as overbuilding. We've always been criticized for overbuilding. But I think it would work in our favor. If you look at a number of the facilities that were damaged, you will see some of them. They were warehouses with aluminum sheeting, not galvanized sheeting, aluminum, and not steel sheeting either, aluminum sheeting. You saw trailer parks with trailers overturned. You saw wooden houses just splintered in pieces. And when you have a Category 4 coming at you, that is what you can expect. That is what you will get from a Category 4 hurricane. So we saw those things, and one of the things that I would want to know is that, God forbid, we get a 4 or we get a 5. I would want the death toll to be 0. Come on, we can build back houses. We can rebuild communities. It might be a good idea because some communities may need to be rebuilt, right? But the bottom line is that it allows, if we can get persons out of harm's way for that 24-hour, 48-hour period, get them to a safe place, that is where we want to go. And so evacuation is going to be very, very important.
I want to go back to
Yes.
preparation or preventative measures. Each time we have any issue of this nature, we speak about getting our persons building in areas that they should not be building in, on river banks, in places where rivers used to be 5 or 10 years ago. Has there been any development, any progress in relocating, moving, or getting these communities out of these flood-prone or disaster-prone areas?
Close at hand,
Yes?
Gully Bank, Sandy Park.
Right.
We had several deaths there.
Yes. We have not made any move in that direction up to this point in time. There are two things on the horizon. One, We continue to put a lot of trust and faith in the local authorities, first of all, so that we can ensure that going forward, this does not continue to happen. That's what we're hoping, that the local authorities will go in, they will manage their part of the bargain, as in making sure that persons are approved for building, and so these areas do not continue to get out of hand. The Act also allows us to designate some areas as especially vulnerable areas. We are now, it means that we could designate an area, and by designating it a especially vulnerable area, we could go in and have persons relocated. We could go in and put mitigation measures in place if it is possible. What we're doing right as we speak is to put the regulations in place now to cause us to be able to implement that part of it. Okay. So we are not yet there with the especially vulnerable areas. But it is of concern. It is of concern.
What about the vulnerable members of the population, the elderly, expected mothers, children, persons living with disability? How do you go about incorporating? What's the plan for them, rather?
Okay. And we make sure that in everything that we do in disaster risk management, we consider this broad topic that we call gender. And by gender, we're not talking male, female. We're talking about persons with disability. We're talking about especially vulnerable persons in the population. And so in 2017, again, through our parent ministry, an assessment was done across Jamaica into all the communities to find exactly some of those persons. Elderly who are living alone, elderly who would need to be targeted for an evacuation if that becomes necessary. And we now have a database, and what we're trying to do at this point in time is to make sure that that database is alive and well. We maintain the database. That information is fed into the local authorities so that those vulnerable persons can be targeted. On a wider basis, though, I know at the national level, we have a unique relationship with one of the faith-based entities, which has a responsibility for hurricanes, for example. The minute we're threatened, they have a responsibility to go across. They have taken the responsibility to go across the cities and towns, pick up the homeless, and get them into a space to ride out a hurricane. And that is something that we have been doing and doing successfully. We cannot let the vulnerable suffer anymore.
So practically speaking, you would know that Miss Mary in Billis Bay she's bedridden.
Yes.
And she needs somebody to come and get her.
That is correct. That is
well
correct.
ahead of the hurricane
That
striking.
is correct. And in the event of, one of those sudden onset events like an earthquake, we know, and we have GPS coordinates, for example, for these facilities. We know that this is where this person is or should be, and we can send persons there to extract them.
I'm going to take you back to the question of evacuation, whether mandatory or otherwise. There are some events that are slow moving and some that are sudden onset. How comprehensive an evacuation plan do you have for each of these kinds of events? So, for example, people speak very often of the special vulnerability of an area like Portmore to some natural disasters. You may be able to evacuate Portmore in an orderly way over several days, depending on how far away a storm is. But if the threat is a tsunami, for example, and you need to get people out of there very quickly, have you mapped out the routes that they would be taking and how long it would take to evacuate that population and get them in which particular directions to what locations?
Okay, and that is a matter that is on our plate right at this point in time. Let me just say, Portmore was one of the first communities that we developed an evacuation plan for, and actually rehearsed it physically a number of times, and outside of that had done a number of tabletop exercises on that. The municipal corporations working alongside us have been asked to develop similar plans for similar communities within their jurisdiction. When it comes to the sudden onset events, what we have been doing is working with the Jamaica Constabulary in particular, to ensure that we can get to it and work with it. What we have is a overall, should I call it a framework that should deal with those sudden onset events, and we're building that out now so that it can be more specific to certain communities such as Portmore. It could be an aircraft that goes down in Portmore and persons have to get out very quickly. It could be an earthquake, it could be a tsunami. And so those are things that we have in a broad framework right now, and we're now trying to narrow that down for community-specific activities.
This is the RGR News Forum. Today we have as our special guest Major Clive Davis, the Director General of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, looking at a number of areas of risks and how you manage them. And in that regard, Major Davis, I want to take you now to one of the risks that we don't pay enough attention to it in terms of how we build and the consequences of that in respect of a disaster such as a major fire, for example. So we see a lot more multi-story buildings going up around the corporate area these days, some of them as high as maybe 12 stories and above. We know that our firefighting services are not at their most capable at this time in terms of resources. What do you know of their plans to up their game, so to speak, to meet the new requirements of fighting high-rise fires, for example?
Okay, let me start out by saying that we do work exceptionally close with the Jamaica Fire Brigade, and we all fall under the same ministry, so we sit at the table when it's budget time, we advocate on their behalf, we source equipment on their behalf, we work alongside them because they form a critical component in the disaster risk management on the country. Let me talk about high-rise buildings. There are some very basic features that must be incorporated in the construction of any high-rise building. Wet and dry risers. This is where piping is placed in the building to fight fire from the building. You should not need a fire truck to go to the building to fight a fire. So every floor should have hose reels on it, and depending on the area to be covered, a number of hose reels. The wet riser is a piping structure that goes into the building that is always charged, always has water in it. The dry riser will require maybe a connection to a hydrant or a connection to a fire engine for the water to be pumped there. But the firefighters going up there, you see, nowhere in the world are you going to get a fire truck that goes up 20 floors, right? They have a limit that they go to, but thereafter, the firefighting is going to take place on the building, in the building, with the equipment that's in the building.
Sorry, but there's also evacuation, though, because the firefighters have to help assist from outside.
There we go, and I'm coming to that. So the wet risers, the dry risers, compressed fire extinguishers, supposed to be also in place, the normal extinguishers that we speak of. Emergency exits must be a part of that construction, and whether those emergency exits are external to the facility, as we see some of them sometimes, or they're internal. And when they're internal to the building, they must be fire resistant to at a minimum 30 minutes to allow, when persons go into that stairwell, they should be safe for 30 minutes. It should be fireproof. The doors, for example, when locked, should not allow smoke inside of them. Now, these specifications, how do we get to them? It is a process that the Jamaica Fire Brigade and the local authorities have to insist on, because the code says so. We know what is required. We now have to make sure that those things happen. That is the Jamaica Fire Brigade, the local authorities. The building approval process has to be rigid. It has to be monitored. We cannot just sign, stamp, and say you have permission to build. We need to go and check to see that they're building in accordance with the approved plans.
So you have had now, let's say the last 24 months.
Yes.
You have had enough of these buildings that have gone up for you to be able to tell us whether what you're telling us is in theory only or whether these specifications have been adhered to.
In most cases, we can say, and this is we do not do inspections on buildings, But having spoken to our persons, especially those in the fire prevention division, they are telling us that these things have been adhered to. Now, are being adhered to. Let me tell you the challenge I have though. I was at a hotel recently and I noticed there are fire doors. And fire doors are meant to be along corridors because you're meant to be able to contain a fire in a section of the building and it not coming out on the other side. But what I found was that the fire doors were cotched in the open position. They actually had a latch on it and kept it in the open position. It is wrong. And so even when the building is built to the best of specifications, if persons who operate the building and manage the building do not maintain those facilities, do not conduct regular drills. I know people don't like it in hotels. They don't want to disrupt the flow, but these things must happen because persons on the 10th floor are going to be required to walk all the way down to the ground floor using the stairwell. The stairwells cannot be used to store old furniture and all of that kind of thing. And the building operators must be held accountable for that.
I want to bring my colleagues back in on this, but just before, my last question to you, though, on this particular issue. You have gone through the specifications that are required of those doing the construction.
Yes.
Nevertheless, and of course, obviously those measures would be hugely beneficial in terms of the mitigation or prevention. Nevertheless, it would seem that there would still be a requirement for the fire service to have enhanced resources to play their own role in assisting in a fire emergency.
Yes.
And the question is whether they are being given additional resources to meet those requirements.
I'm convinced that they are. I do not have the exact figures, but I know in the last 18 or so months, we've acquired in excess of 6 fire trucks. And I know that more fire trucks are in the budget to be landed this year. In addition to that, let me add, one of the critical things that firefighters need to be able to access building is what they call their bunker gear. The fire resistant equipment, the breathing apparatus, and so on. I have been told that there was never a time before now when the fire brigade had more of this equipment in all of their stations. True it is, we need to build the fleet. We need to we need to be robust about how we change out the fleet. Some of the fleet is aging, and a fire truck is exceptionally expensive. But I know that efforts are being made to correct that. Additionally, you know that we just acquired 2 new fireboats, brand new fireboats that have now been put in service right across Jamaica. We now have 3. Prior to that, we had no fireboats in operation.
Where are they stationed?
One is in Kingston, the other in Montego Bay, and one in Ocherius.
Mm-hmm. One of the facilities that you would normally have a general, you need disaster management is the hospitals. Mm-hmm. Are they in a state of readiness, given, like, for example, Haiti? They had an influx of patients, and they had nowhere to take some of them. Should we have a
You mean following the recent earthquake?
Yes. Should we have a major earthquake in Jamaica, any major disaster, persons being injured or need hospital care? Or hospitals in a position for that?
Okay. The Ministry of Health chairs one of the 7 committees of the National Disaster Risk Management Council. The council is headed by the Prime Minister. The Ministry of Health chairs one, the Medical Emergency and Medical Response Committee. The last mass casualty simulation exercise was done in June of this year in Manchester. It is an ongoing activity of the Ministry of Health to move across the island in their different regions to simulate these. And when they do these exercises, we do a desktop initially, and then we go live with people. So we simulate an accident on Spur Tree, and we move physical bodies into the Mandeville regional. And when that has busted at its seams, we go to the private facility, we erect tents on the compound, and we work. And so one of the things I'm very comforted about is the fact that the Ministry of Health has been exceptionally proactive in this area of mass casualty. And they have been going across the island, right across the island, practicing that over and over again. And so true it is, in the early hours of the impact, we might get overcrowding. We might get overcrowding. It's going to take a while before the doctors and nurses who are off duty to be brought on duty to cause the facility to be expanded. Many of the hospitals that we have a contingency plan where there are church halls and so on and other government facilities in close proximity that they have already identified that they will use in the event of an emergency situation like this. The last request I know I got from that committee was to improve their stock of tentage. And if they don't have them, they want to make sure we at the ODPEV have them so that they can set up field hospitals. Because in the event that buildings are crumble, that is where we want to go.
And how quickly will you be able to get those tents to them?
The intent, okay, right now we have 8 warehouses across Jamaica with supplies, disaster management supplies. And so they can be accessed by the local authority. We don't have to move equipment out of Kingston into Hanover. We have warehouses across the island, and the intent at this time is to even put more in place as we do our risk assessments and we understand which roadways might be impacted. We understand where the landslides could occur, where the flooding could occur, and so on. We have to now add warehouses, and that is something that we are doing at this point in time.
What about our correctional facilities with prisoners? You know, some of course overcrowded. How do you put them as a part of your plan? What plan is there?
They're right. They have been factored in the disaster risk management plan, and more so from a security point of view. And again, there is a committee, National Disaster Risk Management Council committee, that deals with emergency operations. It is chaired by the Jamaica Fire Brigade, but on it also sits the Jamaica Constabulary. And so I will not speak too much to that right now because it would be a security matter. But in that, there is a written plan for a response to our correctional institutions, and that plan would be rolled out by the Jamaica Constabulary in the lead with the Jamaica Defence Force. But it is one of the areas of serious concern to us. And again, we don't have to have it happen to us to learn. We saw what happened in the Eastern Caribbean in the aftermath of Irma and Maria. Those are things that we have to plan for.
As it relates to, still on evacuation, you said you did a simulation in Portmore recently. When was that and how successful was it? But also, in addition to that, do we have standards set up in schools and, as you say, hotels where they are supposed to carry out these drills? How often, and have they been adherent to that recommendation?
Okay, there are no standards set, and that would fall between us and the Occupational Safety and Health Unit in the Ministry of Labour. There are no standards set that says that there must be a drill every term, every week, every month. There are no standards. We're hoping to get that instituted in schools. We know that they practice them. We know that they tend to go along with our program. So when we have earthquake awareness period in the start of the year, they tend to do their drills. We have, each month we get maybe in excess of 100, 120 requests from schools across the island for that kind of intervention. So we know they're happening. What we would want, though, is, you're correct, is for it to be institutionalized. And at the end of it, somebody signs a paper, sends it to us to say, look, I conducted this drill, and this was the effect that it had on us. Another area that schools have been going into, though, I must add, is that that issue to deal with active shooters, as they call it, right? So they have also not only been looking at the evacuation processes, but also their lockdown processes with respect to crime and violence. And we are a part of that. In fact, we have been, we just recently did one at the St. Andrews High School for Girls. And we were the ones who coordinated the activity with the Jamaica Constabulary and then we're now in the process of actually documenting it for their purpose so that they can use it and it can be replicated in other institutions.
That's an active shooter drill?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And for Portmore, what was the outcome of that?
Okay,
trial?
the last exercise we did for Portmore was in 2016, and it was done with the Canadian, the Canadian Armed Forces. We simulated an earthquake, and literally, the Canadians landed a number of troops at Norman Manley International Airport, and then fanned out into Portmore to do damage assessment. The movement in Portmore, however, was restricted to a few persons that we considered to be in that vulnerable population group. So we would have sent vehicles in, we targeted those persons, we sent vehicles in to move those persons onto into the corporate area.
Right.
That's what we did. But all in all, what we found was that it was real. We understood and we picked up some challenges. We picked up challenges with the roadway. We picked up challenges as you hit the Mandela coming out of Portmore, challenges as you hit Marcus Garvey coming out of Portmore. And it tells us that we are going to have a real issue if we have to do it in a hurry.
And if you have to do it during this intensive construction phase?
That is a matter that has come to the fore in recent times. As we anticipated that tropical storm coming our way the other day, I know a high-level meeting was had because we saw that as being one of the potentially most dangerous activity for the city and persons around the city. A number of steps were taken, including the Jamaica Defence Force going in and doing an assessment of some of the road works and making recommendations for them to be addressed in the best possible way as we anticipated at rainfall. My board recently at the last board meeting directed that a certain liaison be set up with the Ministry of, with the National Works Agency, and I report to that board at the next board meeting, because that is an area of concern, very much an area of concern for the Board of Management.
Fast running out of time, and I want to ask you about a particular situation, well, particular area of care. I don't know whether you have been taking note of. A, the most vulnerable communities in respect of, say, old building stocks, where earthquakes are concerned, where you may have particularly important installations there, which might be particularly vulnerable. Two, whether you have looked at the proximity of some petrol stations to institutions like schools. I won't name any one of them in particular now, but I can think of one immediately where there's a petrol station right running alongside the back fence of a particular school. Whether you have looked at that and others and to advise accordingly in respect of whether the petrol station should be relocated or whether the school should be relocated or whether you have that kind of vulnerability in respect, for example, of a petrol station and a hospital, for example.
When I think about earthquakes, there are four things, that pops up for me. And the first one is land management. And I think that if we do not get that right, it is going to be our downfall. And that's a part of it. It is where we choose to put what structures, how these structures impact each other. I mean, show me a power plant in Jamaica that does not sit on the coast, sit on alluvial soil, exposed to liquefaction and also wave action from a tsunami. And so we have to, there's a deeper thinking that we have to enter into as we try to build a more resilient country. Our two airports, are they in the right spot? One of them is wrapped around by hotels. Is that the place for it to be? And so we're very concerned about those kind of matters. And it is something that we have been advocating. It is something that we have been bringing to the attention of the authorities. Sometimes there are other factors at play. We hope we can get in on all of those other factors and understand why it is that this has to go here, or why have we chosen to put this here. But all in all, at the end of the day, if we have a small piece of rock that we have to manage, and if we do not manage it properly, we are going to have a challenge.
The petrol stations.
Yes, I am concerned about where some of those petrol stations are. I am concerned about some of the routes, especially now that petroleum tankers take to deliver their supplies. I'm concerned about the hours that they operate. It is a concern, and it's something that we are going to be even taking on a little bit more now.
So you need to have some discussions with the trade.
We have to, with the trade and in concert
How so?
with the Jamaica Constabulary. And especially now in the city of Kingston, based on the kind of rerouting that has to be taking place, they are moving in some very tight spaces and in some communities, housing communities.
How soon do you expect to hold a discussion with them?
I would say within a month, we have to get there. We have to get there. And the construction, especially that, is meant to continue for a while. It means that we have to ensure that we do not have one of those situations happening, especially now that this construction is taking place.
Herman?
Cannot.
Let me ask you about chemical spills. We have those from time to time.
Yes.
Fortunately, none has been of a magnitude that has really caused mass casualties, but this is something where, among other things, we are a maritime and a growing maritime space. And so whether on land or in a harbor, there are dangers. How are we doing with that in terms of examining the risks and being prepared for the risks?
Okay. In 2017, we completed the National Chemical Emergency Risk Management Plan. It was a directive from the government, and we completed that plan and has exercised that plan since. So it deals with the whole range of chemicals, and including issues relating to oil spill and so on. In that plan, the Jamaica Defence Force Coast Guard is responsible for spills underwater, while on land, it's a Jamaica Fire Brigade. One of the areas that we have been working on jointly, all three of us, is to increase both the equipment available to deal with some of these things and also the training of the personnel to deal with those issues. There is a grouping in Jamaica, however, that continues to monitor things like oil spills. And it comes out of people like Petrojam and so on who manage spaces like that. In addition to that, though, let me just explain that in recent times we have gotten a little closer to the International Atomic Energy Agency, because you do know that we have a nuclear facility, have a small facility in Jamaica for teaching purposes. And because we run a large transshipment port, it is not uncommon for items of that nature to pass through our shores. And so what we have been doing now is training persons and developing plans to manage exactly that. And we have had a number of persons exposed overseas to that kind of training. In another month, we will have some 4 or so Jamaicans going into Texas for another training program with that organization to manage those things. We are not taking any chances, and as we move to establish and expand our port facility, we do recognize that expansion comes with some inherent risk. And so the ODPEM now has to position itself to deal with those as and when they come.
Are you talking to the Caribbean Maritime University?
We have a meeting with the Caribbean Maritime University, I think it's next week Wednesday. Yes, because we do recognize that there's a synergy, that a number of synergies, let me put it that way, and they have reached out. We normally work as government entities, but they have reached out from an academic point of view to link with us now, and we have a forum where we're going to be sitting down, I think it's next Wednesday, to work through some of these very issues. We want them to get a boat also, We want them to be able to evacuate persons using their boat.
Because they are also vulnerable.
Yes. They are.
Anything on air pollution, recent issues in terms of communities being blanketed with smoke, persons getting sick? Does that fall under your remit, or any comment on that?
It is again another area of concern to us. And whilst whenever we have these events, whether it is another fire out of Riverton or anything of that nature, we also get involved in that process. We coordinate the gathering of the data between the Ministry of Health that does some, the NEPA that does some. We pull that together. It is our business to ensure that the entities that are required to take the necessary steps to reduce them, to get it out of the way, do it. And so it is not out of our remit either to provide resources to the fire department, for example, to put out these kind of fires when they happen. But air pollution, I understand that under normal circumstances, our air quality is good. It is when we have these adverse events that things go a little amok. And the RPM does play a role in coordinating the activities to mitigate or to respond to those activities.
And that's the final word on that, and for the entire discussion in respect of our disaster risk management portfolio today. I want to thank our guest, the Director General of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, Major Clive Davis, for being our solar panelist today for this edition of the RJR News Forum. Thank as well my colleagues from the newsroom, Nick Dawkins and Herman Green. I'm Earl Moxham. Have a good day.